All right, so get this. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a world where you had to give God very specific gifts to get on his good side.
Interesting.
We're going way back to ancient Israel, cracking open Leviticus Chapter 1 from the King James Bible.
Leviticus. Now, there's a book full of rules and regulations.
It is. And this chapter is all about offerings. But not just any old offerings. These were super specific, carefully chosen gifts.
You mean it wasn't like just showing up with like a basket of fruit or something?
Nope. There was a whole system, a very precise way of doing things.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what kind of offerings are we talking about here?
Well, first up, you've got your burnt offerings.
Yeah.
Like imagine bringing a bull, like a full-on bull.
Whoa, a bull. That's a pretty big offering.
It is. But hold on, there are rules. It has to be a male, perfect, no blemishes whatsoever.
Wow, they weren't messing around, huh?
Not at all. And you had to present it at the tabernacle door. Like, picture that scene.
Okay, I'm picturing it. This is a big deal. What happens next?
This is where it gets really interesting. The person making the offering lays their hands on the bull's head.
That's a powerful image. What do you think that symbolized for them?
I don't know. It's like they were transferring something onto the animal. Maybe their hopes, their regrets, like a physical way of showing their inner state.
That's a really thought-provoking interpretation, a kind of symbolic passing on of something.
Right. It's like trying to decode an ancient language, trying to understand their beliefs and worldview.
Absolutely. It's a window into a whole different way of thinking about the relationship between humans and the divine.
Okay, so next up, we've got offerings from the flocks. Sheep and goats. Same rules apply. Male, without blemish.
Okay, so far so good. What's the catch this time?
This time, Leviticus gets really specific about where the animal has to be slaughtered. The north side of the altar.
North side. Why north?
That's the million-dollar question. Some scholars think north symbolized judgment or testing in ancient cultures.
Interesting. So maybe it was like acknowledging their vulnerability before God's judgment?
Yeah, maybe. It's definitely an interesting detail to think about.
It really shows how every little detail was loaded with meaning. They weren't leaving anything to chance.
It's like every element of the ritual was carefully considered. And speaking of meticulous, wait till you hear about the bird offerings.
Oh, birds too.
Yeah, turtle doves or pigeons. But Leviticus goes into overdrive on the instructions.
How so?
We're talking about head wringing, specific instructions for the blood, even how to discard the feathers.
Whoa, talk about micromanaging. Why all the fuss over a few birds?
I know, right? It's crazy detailed. But remember, this was their way of communicating with God, seeking forgiveness.
I guess it makes sense. Every little action, every detail had to be just right.
Precisely. And there's this phrase that pops up all the time. Sweet savor.
Yeah.
Like the offering has to be a sweet savor to the Lord.
Sweet savor. Now what does that tell us about how they perceived God?
Right. What do you think? Did they think God could be, like, literally appeased by the smell of a burnt offering?
Well, it's a fascinating concept, isn't it? It really does make you think, doesn't it? This sweet savor idea, it's almost like they believed God was a being who you could please through these, well, kind of sensory offerings.
Right, like the smell, the smoke going up, it was all part of it.
Exactly. A sensory experience meant to, well, to please God, you know?
It is a very different way to think about God than many people do now, right?
Yeah, for sure. It kind of feels, I don't know, almost transactional. Like you bring the right gift, do it the right way, and boom, you're in God's good books.
You get the divine stamp of approval.
Haha, yeah, exactly. It really speaks to their understanding of how humans and God interacted. Like, we always had to keep working to stay on his good side.
It's interesting. It seems like they believed they could control things. Like if they did everything perfectly, they'd get a good outcome.
Yeah, that desire for control, for trying to appease these forces bigger than us, that's pretty universal, I think.
Even today, right? Like maybe we don't offer animal sacrifices anymore, but are there other ways we try to appease, I don't know, fate or something?
Absolutely. Think about superstitions, rituals for good luck, even how we plan our lives down to the last detail.
It's all about creating order, right?
Yeah.
In a world that can feel pretty chaotic.
You got it. And speaking of finding order, we've got to talk about atonement. It's a big part of this whole sacrifice system.
Yeah, atonement, like making things right when you've messed up.
Exactly. Seeking forgiveness, trying to get back in harmony with God. You know, the pressure must have been immense.
Yeah, I can only imagine, like one tiny mistake and bam,
Yeah.
your offering is rejected. And who knows what happens then?
It really highlights how they saw that distance between humans and God, that fear of judgment, constantly needing to bridge that gap.
It makes you think about how they saw sin and guilt, right? How seriously they took it, and the length that they went to be forgiven.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't just about individual atonement either. There were offerings for the whole community, too, like for the well-being of everyone.
Like a group effort to stay in good graces with God, keep things
It's
harmonious.
a collective responsibility. Their relationship with God wasn't just individual, it was communal.
It's amazing how much we can learn about their whole society from
Yeah.
these texts, right? Not just their religion, but how they lived and interacted.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, their social structure, their view of the world, it's all there.
So we've covered a lot. The types of offerings, the symbolism, the atonement aspect.
Mhm.
But there's one thing we haven't touched on yet.
What's that?
The idea that these sacrifices were pointing to something bigger.
Mhm.
A foreshadowing, if you will. Let's bring in some commentary from Matthew Henry he wrote back in 1710.
Oh, Matthew Henry, he had a lot to say about this stuff.
He did, and he saw these sacrifices as a type of Christ, like they were prefiguring events to come.
Interesting. So it's not just about ancient rituals, but maybe prophecy, too. What do you think about that interpretation?
It's pretty thought-provoking. It adds a whole new layer of meaning, right? What do you think? What would it mean to see these sacrifices as prefiguring Christ?
Well, for one thing, it adds a deeper, more spiritual meaning. It's not just about appeasing an angry God. It becomes about a future redemption, a bigger sacrifice to come.
Like a promise of grace and reconciliation.
Exactly. But Henry doesn't stop there. He also talks about how important the offerer's inner state was. They had to be willing, show love, acknowledge they weren't worthy. What do you make of that?
It's like the outward actions weren't enough. It had to come from the heart.
That's a crucial point. It's about approaching the ritual sincerely, genuinely wanting to connect with something bigger.
It's not just about the act, but the thought behind it. That's an idea that still resonates today, right?
Absolutely. It's something you see in all kinds of spiritual traditions. That intention matters, that inner disposition.
It reminds us that even though these rituals seem strange to us now, they were deeply meaningful to them.
Yeah, they were wrestling with huge questions about life, death, sin, just like we still do today.
Okay, so we've talked about the rituals, their meaning, and even their potential connection to later ideas. But before we wrap up this deep dive, what do you think we can take away from all this?
Well, for me, it's a powerful reminder of how important ritual is, period. We crave structure, meaning, connection. And rituals help us with all that.
It's true. Whether they're religious or not, rituals give us a way to deal with the complexities of life.
Exactly. They become a language, a way to communicate with the divine, or whatever you believe in.
And they're everywhere, right? Even in our modern lives. We light candles, have ceremonies, all sorts of rituals.
Think about weddings, funerals. Those rituals are packed with symbolism. They tap into something universal.
It's like we're wired to need these rituals, to find comfort and meaning in them.
And that, to me, is pretty amazing. Even as the world changes, that need for connection, for meaning, it stays the same.
So as we come to the end of this deep dive, what's one last thing we can leave our listeners to think about?
How about this? As you go about your day, notice the rituals you do, big or small. What are your modern day offerings? What actions, what commitments show what you truly believe in?
It's a great question. What do we offer to the world? What gives us purpose, that sense of connection?
That's something for everyone to ponder, don't you think?
I think so. It's been awesome exploring all this. Thanks for being on the deep dive.
You're welcome. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Welcome back. We've been digging deep into Leviticus Chapter 1, all those offerings. And, what's really hit me is just how powerful rituals can be.
Yeah, they really are fascinating, aren't they? Rituals are everywhere. They're kind of part of being human, I think.
It's like, how else can we make sense of things we can't see or touch, Like atonement, divine favor. It's also abstract.
It is. But light a candle, perform a set of actions, and suddenly those abstract ideas feel a little more real, I guess.
Exactly. It's almost like those outward actions, the specific steps, become a language, a way to communicate with something bigger than ourselves.
You're right. It's like a language. And it's not just the actions themselves, right?
It's the whole mindset, the intention. You have to approach it with reverence.
Yeah, like creating a sacred space, even if it's just for a moment. Step away from everyday life and connect with something, well, transcendent.
It's amazing how, even though we don't do things exactly like the ancient Israelites, you can see those echoes of ritual in our lives today.
Oh, totally. We still have Ceremonies, light candles, all sorts of things.
And those modern rituals are full of symbolism too, right?
Tons, like exchanging rings at a wedding, lowering flags at a funeral. These gestures, they speak to everyone, no matter what you believe.
Right, because deep down we all need those rituals. They give us comfort, meaning. We might not offer bulls and pigeons anymore, but we still find ways to express ourselves through these acts.
And that's really beautiful when you think about it. As much as things change that need to connect with something to find meaning, it's always there.
So we're wrapping up this deep dive. What are some things we can take away? What can we learn from these ancient practices, even if we don't believe exactly the same things they did?
Well, I think it reminds us that we're all part of something bigger. This story that's been going on for centuries, people trying to understand life, death, all the big stuff.
And those big questions, they haven't gone away, have they? We're still searching for meaning, purpose, connection.
Absolutely. And these ancient practices show us we're not alone in that. We're all searching together in a way.
All right, so last thought to leave our listeners with, something to really make them think.
How about this? Take a look at your own life, your day-to-day. What are your rituals? What do you do that shows what you value, what you believe in?
What are our modern-day offerings? What gives us that sense of purpose, of being connected to something larger, something to ponder, for sure?
Lots to think about.
It's been a wild ride exploring all these ancient rituals. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, keep diving deep.